Street racing traces back as early as the 1930s, but took years and years to gain in popularity and go global. Starting in the 1930s, its presence in the US slowly rose, and this was due to the advancement in the car's technology. Horsepower took an enormous jump in this period, allowing racers to show off the new cars at top speeds and create a competitive environment for the racing industry. At the time, professional racing hadn't begun, as popular series today like NASCAR was invented in 1948 and F1 series in 1950. Despite the large interest that grew in the late 1940s, nobody was aware of the dangers in that time, as seatbelts and airbags had yet to be invented until the mid-1950s. Can you imagine cars going over 160 kilometers an hour around tracks with no seatbelts or airbags? The 1960s sparked a large rise in the street racing community when three main Detroit-based car companies began producing high-powered performance cars. At the time, private racing venues were not always available, in which these car advocates began to take their passion for racing to the streets illegally. Throughout this time of the 1960s to 1980s, these street racing communities were considered underground and tried to stay hidden from the mainstream market. It generally wasn't a big scene of people at these races. However, in the 1990s, this was a completely different story. The 1990s was a part of a massive advance in technology around the world, in which cars were a part of the same advancement. This period introduced electronic fuel injection and forced induction, meaning turbochargers and superchargers. Many cars used today were introduced in this era, such as the Toyota Supra, the Mazda RX-7, Acura Integra Type R, Honda Civic Type R, Toyota MR2, and the Nissan GT-R. Street racing had also entered the mainstream market at this time and left the underground world as the media started to cover it, and popular culture had begun to adopt it with new movies such as The Fast and the Furious being introduced in 2001. Throughout the 2000s, being in the mainstream market, it had become an extremely pressing issue, and it had become popular around the world.
The Fast and the Furious makes illegal street racing look cool.
But as you know, there has been a lot of hype over this particular film, enough to cause the police department, the city attorney's office, and parents to hold a joint press conference.
After the movie, The Fast and the Furious aired, street racing in Los Angeles County increased by 75–80%.
However, despite the large penalties put in place, street racing appears to continuously grow. In order to combat this fatal situation, safety equipment in cars have greatly improved and the penalties for street racing have become more impactful. With the recent pandemic, COVID-19 becoming prevalent in March of 2020, the roads began to clear and the illegal street racers had come out more. According to Global News, Toronto had seen a 600% increase in stunt driving. From March 23rd to April 27th of 2019, there were only 32 incidents. Yet, in that same period, in 2020, that number jumped to 222. This large increase in numbers and rising popularity within street racing has become an extremely pressing issue that is causing fatal injuries and harm to innocent people on the roads. At Teens Learn to Drive, we are attacking this issue and trying our best to keep the roads safe. We had the chance to interview professional race car driver James Hinchcliffe, who is an advocate for safe driving, and he talked about why it's so dangerous to street race.
You know, one of the big challenges about motorsports, you know, if you're a fan of racing and if you ever wanted to get into it, everybody knows one of the big challenges is simply the cost. You know, even at an entry level, you know, it's an expensive proposition. But then again, so is a set of golf clubs. You know, it's all kind of relative. Mm-hmm. But if you've got a road car, you feel like that is your ticket to be able to drive fast, and it's just not that simple. So, you know, for me, my view on street racing is a very strong opinion because I know what the consequences are of something going wrong. You know, everybody kind of thinks, oh, it's never going to happen to me. Well, it happens to me on a racetrack. If it can happen to me, it's pretty much happened to me. Mm-hmm. And I know what the results of that are, what the consequences of that are. And again, that's in a controlled environment, in a car designed to keep me safe with far more safety advancements and protections than a road passenger car has. And I know how risky that situation still is.
What could happen when you drive over the speed limit? While the dangers are pretty self-explanatory, let's give it to our boy Newton and he can explain it for you. To define Newton's law of inertia, it is often stated as an object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion with the same speed and in the same direction unless acted upon by an unbalanced force. Think of it this way. If you're on the Leviathan roller coaster at Canada's Wonderland, you're doing 148 kilometers per hour when you come down the hill. If the roller coaster hits a barrier like a brick wall that's at the bottom of the dip, what would happen to you? Your body would either fall out of the cart and you fly through the air at 148 kilometers an hour until you hit the ground, or if you have a secured seatbelt, your body will hit that seatbelt at that same speed because your body will continue to stay in motion until something stops you. When we compare this scenario to a car crash, the faster your car is going, the faster your body will hit the stopping force, such as the windshield, seatbelt, airbag, etc., and thus cause more damage to you. So, to define Newton's law of inertia, it is often stated as an object at rest stays at rest and an object in motion stays in motion with the same speed and in the same direction unless acted upon by an unbalanced force. What would an unbalanced force be? No, not the force like in Star Wars. We mean an unbalanced force in car crashes. An unbalanced force is one that causes a change in the motion of an object. Unbalanced forces are opposite and not equal. So a car goes straight through the intersection at a consistent speed, and another car runs the light and hits them at 100 kilometers an hour, changing the direction of the car. This other car acts as the unbalanced force, causing a tremendous amount of damage to the car. However, this damage caused by the unbalanced force will always vary by the resistance from it. For example, if a car hits an object with a large resisting force, such as a brick wall, the car will have a lesser stopping distance and cause more damage. Whereas, if the car runs into an unbalanced force with little resistance, such as a haystack, the car will be allowed a larger stopping distance and you will most likely incur lesser damage. The same concept of damage being dependent on resistance applies to speed as well. When you drive 100 kilometers an hour, your car requires a larger stopping distance to come to a full stop. But at 20 kilometers an hour, the car needs less space to come to a stop. Overall, when analyzing the chance of injury to a person in a car, it will all come down to the speed, as the force upon impact will cause your body to continue moving at your speed, whether at 20 kilometers an hour or 100, creating a life or death situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I can elaborate a bit more on that. So when I was in high school, we lost my aunt to a reckless driver. She was driving home. She worked at our elementary school, and she was on her way home, and this individual thought that it would be smart to be traveling at speeds well over the speed limit and run through a red light. And that's where she had T-boned my aunt and took her life on the spot there. And it was crazy because I was actually on my way home from a rugby tournament, and they had shut off the streets, and it was the street that I needed to go down. We all live in the same town. And I just remember being like, I don't know, that's gotta be a really bad accident. And I remember saying like, okay, well, I hope everybody's okay. And I rerouted myself. Later that night, I did find out that it was my aunt. And it's such a devastating loss, and it's traumatizing too, because her daughter, my cousin Janie, actually was on her way home and saw the cop cars and looked into the ditch and said, that looks like the Christmas bag I gave mom. And as she drove up, she realized that it was her mom's car, and she ran out of her car and actually had to see her mom in the vehicle deceased. And how do you ever get that out of your head? How do you ever forgive somebody for being so reckless and taking a life? And then you have to go to court and fight for justice for her as well. And it's just, you feel so useless. You feel like you couldn't even do anything. You know, she was a fundamental aspect of our family, and now she's taken, she's gone. We'll never see her again because somebody decided to be reckless out on the road. So.
Her family hasn't been able to tell Bethany's 6-year-old daughter that her mom is gone because they can't yet believe it themselves.
It's something I loved about her, and her spice. I mean, I miss her already.
Mourning loved ones of Bethany Holguin tell us she was an artist with a fierce spirit who more than anything loved her daughter Layla. They can't believe they lost her during a senseless crash Mother's Day weekend.
He said the only thing on his mind, he said it was a selfish mindset, was to win. The judge sentencing Delio to 22 years in prison. Alfonso saying the punishment can't reduce the pain of loss, but it's justice.
I couldn't look straight into his eyes. I just couldn't look at his face. I was shaking entirely. During the whole time, I was shaking a lot. And I still am.
Delio lost control of his car 3 years ago, racing another vehicle at speeds well over 100 miles per hour on the 5 freeway in Commerce. Michelle Littlefield and Brian Lewandowski were killed. The driver of the UPS truck, Scott Treadway, died in the crash. It's still an emotional nightmare for Alfonso.
I just broke down and cried, and I remember my parents being there because I found out through social media that they had passed away. And then I asked my mom, I was like, is this true? And then she's like, yes, this happened, yeah.
2 people are dead after crashing into a tree in San Jose. They were apparently street racing. And now the search is on for the second car that fled the scene.
Spent some time with the mother, and she was completely devastated. She couldn't believe what had happened.
Black Jeep possibly hit a pole, split in half and fully engulfed.
San Jose police say the victims were racing another car, a gray BMW, when they lost control, swerved, and smashed head-on into this tree. Investigators released these photos of the 3 men inside the BMW who stopped, hopped out of their car, and then left the scene.
They are partly responsible for what happened, and the very least that they should do is show responsibility and care for the injured victims and call the police and wait for the authorities to arrive.
After this crash, his neighbors rushed out trying to console him. They say they recognize the family from the neighborhood. The boys killed were riding again in the back seat. They were just 6 and 8 years old. Witnesses say at around 5:30 last night, 2 cars, a Honda Acura and a Nissan Altima, started speeding through the neighborhood. Detectives say the Honda was on the wrong side of the street. It slammed head-on into the brother's Nissan Versa. A neighbor who tried to help said the older brother just kept repeating that his little brothers weren't breathing and that the other suspected street racer sped off.
It still is. So for me, there's just no reason to do it. If you have that sort of need for speed and you want to go race something, there are opportunities to get into something that are relatively inexpensive, that keep you much safer, keep the other people on the road much safer. And there's just no reason for it.
I think opening up and showing how fun like racetrack sanctioned events can be. And the other thing, you can, I don't know how fast you can go in street racing and like what that looks like, but you can go so fast on racetracks and you can do it safely, but it still feels really exhilarating and really scary in like the adrenaline good way, right? So I think promoting resources that show just how available these on-track experiences are, whether it's to be a passenger or to drive yourself. I think showcasing those resources and show how they're in a lot of different areas can be really helpful.
Raced. I've never felt the need to try and race them off the lights or anything like that, because it's kind of pointless to me. Racing is for a track and against 30 other people on the track. That was always my thing. So yeah, I think if it can be published well and promoted well enough, for sure, go-kart racing, whether it's a professional kart racing or league races with rental karts that cost a few $100s every month or whatever to do a proper league race with 40 or 50 other drivers. If they can be promoted well enough and publicized well enough, then for sure it's going to help the whole street legal street racing and things like that.
But the first thing I would say is, man, whoever's driving the car, you love life, you want to be alive for a long run, just take it easy, go to a safe place to do it, go to a closed circuit, closed area to make it safe, and then you can enjoy it for a long time. And as well as there's a lot of people that loves you and then they want you down here on hurt, and they don't want to talk about you, they want to be with you. And as well as respecting other people as well that will share the street with you. And that could be your mom, that could be your dad, that could be a friend, that could be your sibling, it could be anybody out there that could get hurt by someone else that's driving too fast on the street. And it could be you hurting someone else, sister or brother or whatever. I mean, it's very important that you don't think about just yourself and think about everybody else that's on the street. Go find a spot so it's safe to do and you can't hurt nobody.
Not worth the risk.
Not worth the risk.
Not worth the risk.
Not worth the risk.
Not worth the risk. Not worth the risk.
Not worth the risk.
Not worth the risk.
Not worth the risk.
Not worth the risk.
Not worth the risk.
Not worth the risk.
Not worth the risk.
Not worth the risk.